Hello, I'm your host Sara, and this is Insane. Salam, how's everyone doing? I hope everyone's doing really, really well. Honestly, I start every podcast the same way because I'm really rubbish at small talk. I can't have just small conversations, superficial. I find it really difficult. I'm like, hi, how are you? What do you think of life after death? Do you think you stay in the grave, or do you think that you live amongst other dead people for a while? Do you think you can go and visit your family? That's as light as I go. I'll practice. Anyway, today I was just sitting here and a topic came to mind. So I thought, why don't I have a little discussion on a podcast and share it with you guys? So recently I shared a post on the topic of tawakkul, and it was a post depicting the words of Imam al-Ghazali. And he was saying that just because someone has faith in their heart, it doesn't mean that they would necessarily have feelings of peace, but rather that also required a strong heart. And here by heart, he means someone who is resilient and tough. And so it kind of pairs up the concept that it's not just enough to have faith, but there also has to be some kind of mental resilience associated with that faith in order for peace to manifest in the heart. And it just goes to show the importance of finding that duality, and that requires a lot of hard work, because you've not only got to concentrate on yourself spiritually, but also physically and mentally, and that requires you to go out there in this world and to work and to socialize and to have a sense of social responsibility. And then at the same time, cultivate within you values such as hope and discipline and reliance on God. So it's a system. But I am of the view that any kind of change and any kind of peace can only be found if a person concentrates first on the inside and prioritizes that. Not to excuse oneself from action, but to sort of work at building the foundations, if you like, setting down good foundations so that when you do come to build outwardly, that inside you're strong enough to withhold. Just as an example, I don't know if it's just me, but I always find that, this is just an observation, I might be wrong, but in my life I found that the men that look the strongest in terms of really muscly, for some reason they tend to be the most weak, very sensitive crybabies. I don't know why, but I think they're a good example. They've concentrated so much on going to the gym and looking like they're strong in an obscene way, but they've forgotten that strength starts from within, and that yes, it requires discipline to go to the gym and work out and lift, but who cares? Who cares about that? There is not a door in paradise called deadlift door, where all the deadlift guys and girls enter into paradise if they lift twice their body weight. It just doesn't exist. So why would you prioritize that in your life? It makes no sense. The only way physicality is going to be beneficial to you is if it is a reflection of the strength within. Otherwise, it's just a facade. So, you look at yourself in the mirror and you think, well, aren't I a strong man or woman? And become puffed up in arrogance in that, when the reality is you're not. That's called false advertising. And it's futile because it's only an outward appearance. Had that been teamed up with inward strength as well, then it would be perfect. Now let's consider the other way around, You have people who are really strong inside, but outwardly, they're not. But here's the difference. A person who is strong inside will be strong on the outside. Even if they don't look strong, they will have the courage to stand up for themselves. Even if they lack the physicality, they will do it anyway, because it's a strength that resides within. Whereas the person who just looks strong, when you challenge them, they just break down. They can't fight. I've seen it. I'm not lying. And they're so sensitive. All that muscle and you can't fight. But it doesn't happen the other way around when someone starts off from the inside. And so that's the importance of having that balance. It's perfect if you're strong on the inside and then you can marry that up with being strong on the outside. And that's such a perfect balance. But if you have to choose one over the other, then you choose the inner first. And that's how important it is to cultivate yourself inwardly, because everything that starts inward will eventually spill out into the outward. And that's what we're missing in faith. And that's what we're missing in our well-being systems. And this is where we've gone wrong, in my opinion, as a Muslim ummah, where we've become obsessed with the outward appearance and not enough effort and importance is placed on internal aspects. And if you just think about it, if you had to meet your Lord, he asks you, what have you got? And on a daily basis, you have your prayers. So let's say you're really good and you do all your prayers, and there you go, 25 minutes max out of 24 hours. And then the month of Ramadan, you've got a bit more because you've been fasting. 25 minutes, let's say you read some Quran as well. 30 minutes? 40? And that's it. That's what you're going with. And, what is it you want? Oh, paradise, actually. Paradise, 40 minutes. Yeah. Well, I'm joking. I hope we all get to paradise. But can you see what I'm saying? If the purpose of religion was the outward practice, the physicalities, it'd be more than 40 minutes. It doesn't make sense to be concentrating on just the outward actions. I'm not saying that prayer is not important. Prayer is very important. But the point is that there has to be an inward change. You can't just go relying on outward practice, in the form of the prayers, some Quran, etc. And you've got to be aware of that. And the reason why it's also important to focus inwardly first is that it makes it impossible for the outward not to then be a reflection of what's going on inwardly. Whereas if you focus on the outward, you can mask what's going on in the inside. How many people have we been fooled by because of this act that they put on? And then once you get to know them properly, you're like, oh my God, what is this? Also, it makes the action more meaningful and it impacts you in a different way. For example, if you want to change a habit, say if you want to quit smoking and, you find it extremely difficult to quit, the way that would make the process a lot more easier is if you actually analyze what is it that makes you want to smoke. And people say, well, that's easy, that's problems, and problems don't go away. Well, they don't. But I guarantee that there is a person out there that has a similar problem to you, if not worse, who does not turn to smoking to deal with that. So you can't say it's the problem per se, because there are people with many big problems that don't smoke. So you can't blame it on what's going on outside. So then you must blame yourself, that there is a defect within you, something inside that stops you from dealing with the problems of the world in a healthy way. You can't stop problems from happening, but you can change yourself to make yourself more resilient so that you're able to cope with problems without smoking. So if you worked on the issues inside of maybe perhaps increasing your faith and making yourself mentally resilient in terms of trying to figure out what mental narratives you can adopt and the consequent behaviors that you can practice so that you can stop that narrative that then makes things so unbearable that you have to smoke. And then if you paired that up with spirituality in terms of learning about God so that you can rely on Him better and learning about how this life is a test, and you marry the two, you will find that giving up smoking would become much, much easier. Not so much because of willpower, but because you have adopted these two things, the cognitive and the spiritual. You've adopted them and you've changed so much that smoking isn't something that someone like you does. Not because you had to try so hard to quit smoking, but because you're no longer that person that needs to smoke. And you become that person by developing spiritual and cognitive behavioral techniques and working on yourself. And then you kick the habit. And it's the same thing with, keeping bad company, going to bad places. If you stopped trying to deny yourself those things and you didn't concentrate on the outwards and what it looks like and rather said to yourself, what's going on inside of me? What is it that I have to do to enhance myself so that this behavior, this action, these people no longer suit me as a person because I am no longer that person? And if you do things that way, then giving those places up, giving those people up, giving those bad things up, just naturally happen. Not because you're sacrificing and really trying hard and it's becoming difficult and this faith is difficult, but because you're changing and those things no longer suit you. And so it's not seen as a sacrifice or a burden, but it's seen as no longer befitting of you. And if we lived life in this way, we would be much more at peace inside and outside. And we would come to understand that the issue of life and life's challenges is not something done to us. Suffering is not something done to us, but suffering is something that is done for us so that we can change. And so that those things that we find challenging eventually no longer become a challenge. Not because they in themselves aren't, but because we have changed so that they no longer are. Okay, I think we're going to stop there. I hope that you found that beneficial. And before I go, as always, guys, please do take care.